Kelemvor is the most recent god in history to bear the title Lord of the Dead, succeeding 3 prior gods with the portfolio, Sirik, Merkle, and Jurgil, and remains the sitting god of the dead as of Baldur's Gate 3. The tradition of God of the Dead in Faerûn is one in which mortals often ascend to the office. Merkle, Sirik, and Kelemvor were all once mortals. Merkle aspired to godhood and was rewarded with the title, and Sirik was rather haphazardly, due to a number of curious events, assigned the title. But Kelemvor is a still more interesting story, so let us embark upon his journey. Unlike more ancient gods, we have a good record of the mortal life of Kelemvor Lionsbane, who was one of several siblings born sometime before the time of troubles. His mother died in childbirth, and his father, Kendril Lionsbane, would never forgive him for this. His father was a trained warrior and military veteran who had seen countless campaigns, and he fully expected that his son Kelemvor would follow in his footsteps. Thus, Kelemvor grew up with the twin burden of guilt for his mother's death and the disappointed frown of his father, who was an unforgiving man. His brothers also made him seem small, as they were highly successful in their own right, and had better earned the favor of their father. Contrary to his father's wishes, Kelemvor had strong artistic leanings and sought to pursue the arts. But his father would not have it, and he took control of Kelemvor's life fully at the age of 10. In particular, his father blamed a teacher whom Kelemvor had developed a crush on, Tanith, who was summarily dismissed and beaten to death by those in the employ of Kelemvor's father. Something that enkindled a great hatred in Kelemvor for his father that would bear consequences later in his life. The anger and frustration he felt towards his father was redirected to his martial training, and Kelemvor became a skilled warrior, and his father seemed pleased for a time. However, sometime later, Kelemvor met a girl, somewhat older than he was, and they fell in love. But upon his father discovering this affair, he once again thought it a meaningless distraction from his duties, and thus had her beaten, despite Kelemvor's active protests, and even his attempt to protect her, as Kelemvor was simply shoved aside. Filled with rage, Kelemvor transformed into a large panther, as a hidden family curse took hold of him, and he tore his father to bits, as well as the men at his side. His lover, though frightened, realized it was Kelemvor within, and helped him escape into the surrounding woodlands, where he remained for a time, attempting to come to terms with his new condition. Although initially he seemed to have some control over the transformations, the beast within affected him in his human form too, stoking his anger and leaving him in a bestial state. Fortunately for Kelemvor, his uncle, Burn Lionsbane, had been searching for him, and, unlike his father, his uncle held a very different attitude towards Kelemvor, being more understanding towards his nephew's sensitive side, having pitied him under his father's tutelage. More importantly, his uncle knew the source of the curse that afflicted Kelemvor. This curse went back to a member of the Lionsbane family who was a mercenary, possessed of unrivaled greed, and who abandoned a wounded sorcerer's companion, leaving her to die in the field for the sake of pursuing treasure. With her dying breath, the sorceress cursed his ancestor with an unusual variety of lycanthropy, forcing him and his descendants to transform into a type of werepanther whenever they acted purely for the sake of profit. 5 generations later, the curse had mutated, such that it only affected some members of the Lionsbane family, and, in fact, had turned into the reverse of the original, forcing the person to first ask for a reward before doing anything, lest the beast overcome them. He further lent those afflicted to a man had been forced to take up the mercenary profession as a way of avoiding the manifestation of the curse. He grudgingly joined his uncle's band of mercenaries, and he did his best to make peace with the life that had been foisted upon him. Although this arrangement too came crashing down when Kelemvor's eldest brother, with a retinue of men, ambushed and slaughtered the entire mercenary company in an act of vengeance, whereupon Kelemvor once again transformed into the beast and tore his brother and his company to pieces. Horrified, he fled the scene, only to resign himself to the life of a mercenary yet again, dreaming of a better life without the curse. It was around this time that Kelemvor met a mage called Midnight, and a cleric of Soon called Adon, and the 3 became friends and embroiled in the events that would come to be known as the Time of Troubles. And it was during this period that Midnight and Kelemvor also fell in love with each other. The man Sirik was part of this group too, but later turned turncoat and betrayed his former friends. As the Time of Troubles drew to a close, when locked in mortal combat with Kelemvor, Sirik slew him using the enchanted blade Godsbane, and it seemed as if it was to be the end of Kelemvor's story. After this, Midnight became the new Mystra, goddess of magic, and Sirik took on the portfolio of the dead gods Bane, Merkle, and Baal, at least for a time. However, rather than dying, Kelemvor's spirit was instead siphoned into the sword Godsbane itself, which, as it turned out, had been the god of thieves in disguise, Mask, all along, and Mask had created a virtually undetectable pocket plane where Kelemvor's spirit resided for a decade, while Cyric vindictively sought after the soul from his bone castle in Hades. Ultimately, Mask had sought to usurp some of Cyric's power, and Kelemvor had been a useful tool towards this end, as Mystra had also wanted to find his soul, and Mask desired her cooperation. For 10 years, Kelemvor's spirit resided within the pocket plane that Mask had created for it, until a pivotal moment when a series of complex events led to a depletion of Cyric's power base of faith. Cyric began losing his mind as well. In that moment, Cyric crushed the Sword God's Bane, and Kelemvor's spirit was released into the City of the Dead, the seat of Cyric's power. The two were once again locked into combat, as if reenacting the past, but severely weakened from a massive loss of his faithful, and suffering from loss of sanity, Cyric effectively defeated himself with doubt and fear, and was banished from the City of the Dead. And in a never-before-recorded event, by democratic will of the denizens of the city, Kelemvor was elected the new Lord of the Dead. Initially, Kelemvor's approach to being God of the Dead was the complete opposite of that of his predecessors. Jurgil, Merkel, and Cyric were all very evil and cruel gods, and thus the City of the Dead was filled with cruel and evil punishments. The castle of the Lord of the Dead was formerly known as the Bone Castle, but this was reshaped into the Crystal Spire, meant to be a symbol of the transparency. The Faerunian afterlife is such that souls of those faithful to other gods would go to their respective deities, but those without any faith, the faithless, and those whose faith was incorrect, the false, were to be judged by the God of the Dead. And Kelemvor's predecessors would neglect them or torture them for all of eternity, and generally would do with them what they wished to based on whim. However, despite his noble intentions and the desire to rule over the dead with transparency and justice, Kelemvor's initial policy ultimately led to unforeseen problems. Through his leniency and well-intentioned changes, the faithless and the false who had lived virtuous and honorable lives were rewarded positively, whereas those who were malicious and cowardly were punished severely. Noble and generous souls were sent to the more pleasant parts of the City of the Dead, whilst the wicked and the craven were sent to the worst parts of the city. This led to a change in behavior of mortals as well, as they caught wind of the new policies of the Lord of the Dead. Mortals who were unsure of the gods, but nonetheless brave and honorable, no longer feared death, and gladly threw their lives away in acts of recklessness, trusting in the benevolence of Kelemvor, rather than putting their faith in the gods. And those who were cowardly and cunning without faith were too terrified to act. This, along with certain actions taken by the new Mystra for a time that favored granting magic to those who were good, created a cosmic imbalance and resulted in robbing other deities of potential worshippers. Cyric, who had regained some semblance of his sanity, then brought charges to the circle of greater deities that Mystra and Kelemvor were guilty of cosmic crimes by reason of humanity, allowing the remnants of their human nature to guide their actions as deities. After much deliberation and reflection, Kelemvor realized that he had failed in his duties as God of the Dead. To be a god is to abandon all that is human, the memories and the dreams of the past, and all the trappings of what once was. Internalizing this, he enacted massive changes throughout the City of the Dead, and altered his policies governing the afterlife. The City of the Dead was transformed into a realm of endless gray. Neither light nor dark, neither good nor evil held sway in the city, and it became a realm of apathy and silence. The clarity of the Crystal Spire was replaced by that of an opaque topaz, and Kelemvor, who formerly bore a likeness to his mortal self, took on a new form, bearing dark robes, with his countenance taking on a pallid tone, aging rapidly. All souls were subject to a massive re-evaluation. There would be no torture, but neither would there be joy. All souls would exist in accordance with those who were ethically similar to themselves, and would have to work to forge an afterlife based on the principles they upheld during their lives, whether good or bad. And as a final nail in the coffin, Mystra came to Kelemvor looking for the soul of her patriarch and priest, as well as friend in life, Adon, who had died one of the faithless due to Cyric's malicious influence. And in keeping with his new principles of impartiality, he refused her request to relinquish his soul, which destroyed what little had remained of their love and relationship. And thus the current god of the dead was born. Given Kelemvor's history and demeanor, his relationships with other gods might be predictable. Jurgil serves Kelemvor as scribe of the dead, as he had done for Cyric and Merkel prior to him, but Kelemvor and Jurgil generally have a good relationship with similar attitudes towards death and work well together. His relationship with Mystra is strained due to the events described prior, and he has a good working relationship with the god of Dawn, Lathander, in that they both oppose the undead, and he will work with any deity that opposes undeath. As discussed earlier, Kelemvor's governance of the dead is vastly different from all of his predecessors. Whilst no longer as benevolent as he first began, he nonetheless strives for fairness and impartiality in his judgments. The doctrine of Kelemvor can be summarized as follows. Death is but a part of life. Fear it not, evade it not, and view it not as evil. To fear death delivers you into the hands of those who can bring death down upon you. Die with dignity, neither raging nor seeking to embrace undeath. Do honor to the dead, for their strivings in life brought Faerun to where it is now, and to forget them is to forget also where we are now and why. In addition to new policies regarding the afterlife, one major departure from previous gods who held the title is Kelemvor's overt hostility towards the undead. Undead are ruthlessly sought out and destroyed to the point that the church has a branch of priests called necrobanes, who are dedicated undead hunters, equipped with powerful divine gifts from Kelemvor to root undead out and destroy them wherever they may roam. Otherwise, Kelemvor's priests serve as guides to the living throughout both good and bad times, and when mortal's final hour comes, they see to the last rites of the dying. Now, Kelemvor is a selectable deity in Baldur's Gate 3 for clerics, and likely paladins as well, and they definitely have specific dialogue unique to them. How much of a role the god will play beyond this is not known, but I do have a sneaking suspicion that given Myrkul's role as one of the Dead Three, and some interesting video game history regarding the two, there might in fact be some interactions between clerics of Kelemvor and the followers of Myrkul in that context. Beyond this, the possibility that Jurgil is in fact Withers implies that there might be some special interactions going forward between these characters. But as of this date, this is of course all speculative. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.